Hey friend, in this video, we are going to be talking about when my art went from bad to good. So for those of you who might not know my story, I have had my creative art watercolor surface pattern design business now for almost 10 years. And I wasn't very good when I first started my business. And so I want to give you a little backstory of how I got started, and it's very humble beginnings. But about 10 years ago, my husband and I were moving from Chicago back to my hometown in Southern California. And the moving truck company that we hired got somebody's box of art supplies mixed in with our stuff, and there was no name on it. We discovered paints, calligraphy supplies, a lot of random art things in there. And it was the perfect placement of art supplies in my lap, literally, for the time that I was in. I was working a cubicle job at a financial planning office. I just wasn't feeling like I found my niche, or I found what my soul was excited about doing for my career. I was 23 at the time, and I just didn't like my job. I didn't like driving and commuting, and obviously grateful to have a job, but it was soul sucking for me as a creative. So I would come home, and eventually I started busting open this box of art supplies, and it was therapy for me. I was not good at all. And we're gonna show you some of my early work. I wasn't good. I didn't have any previous experience with watercolor growing up. I definitely grew up with a creative mom, and she always had art supplies around. And so that, to me, I attribute to a lot of my success with art is not being afraid to pick up art supplies and put paint on paper. And so 10 years ago-ish, when I opened that box of art supplies, it was just, I needed an outlet. I needed something that was creative. I just needed a little moment of zen and therapy. I would turn on some good tunes and I would just paint for hours, like till 3 a.m. sometimes, and then have to go to my day job, my desk job, the next day on very little sleep. But entire time at my desk job, I would be obsessed and just thinking about watercolor and calligraphy all day long, and just couldn't wait to get home. So about 5 or 6 months after we moved, after I started my desk job and started discovering watercolor and playing with calligraphy and all of that, I was able to quit my desk job. It was definitely early. We were not financially stable yet, but I just couldn't take it anymore. And I loved watercolor. I loved painting. And I just went after this idea of making my own career from my artwork. And so it started with wedding calligraphy. I was addressing envelopes all the time and hunched over my desk writing these addresses for random people. And then eventually it grew into designing wedding stationery, not just addressing envelopes, until now here we are today. I'm designing patterns and prints and products for products that are in stores like Target and Staples, and working with some amazing brands and coming out with online courses and all of these things. But how did I go from this mediocre at best artist when I first started to a best-selling author, 7-figure art business owner person, which, pinch me, is crazy. So how did I go from that to this? And I have it boiled down to 5 key growing moments. So the first growing moment for me, I have to say this, and it has to be first because I do think it is probably the most important, is years and years of practice and patience. And I know that's frustrating to hear. You can get mad at me. You can virtually throw something at me in your head, but it's true. Every artist has to start somewhere, and they all start bad, most likely. I mean, there's nobody that's just like, boop, here you go, and you're painting like realistic looking portraits and crazy stuff. So years and years of practice. I spent, especially that first year after I quit my desk job and I was starting my business, I was trying to grow at grassroots, just like, what am I doing with my life? What is happening? And I'm figuring out art and calligraphy as I go, self-taught. I spent hours painting, like hours, 8, 12. And if you don't have that kind of time, I understand, but at least dedicate some certain amount of time every single week or every day if you're wanting to see results, if you're wanting to see growth happen with your art. And so just as a reminder, because it's so important to remember when you're just starting out or however far you are into your art hobby endeavor, whatever you want to call it, it does take a lot of time and practice to really develop the eye for composition, how to color mix, muscle memory, all of that stuff. It doesn't come naturally. It's something to learn. It's just like anything. You have to learn it. You have to be dedicated to practice, and sometimes that does take years. So my second growth moment is overcoming mental blocks. Now, going back 10 years, when I was first learning watercolor, I was first learning calligraphy, I had blinders on. I was completely absorbed with learning watercolor, and not just even learning it, just playing with it and being like a child, finding and discovering something for the first time and working at it, figuring it out, and just having fun and enjoying the process. I was like that for the first few years. And then as social media kept growing, as there's more and more accounts and more competition and all that kind of stuff, I to this day have to constantly remind myself to overcome and break down those mental blocks. The mental blocks that are telling you that you're not good enough, or that you should be further along if you've been at it for years, or it's not looking the way you want it to, and so you scrap it and you forget it, I'm just not made for this, whatever. So I am constantly having to remind myself of where I was in the beginning of learning watercolor and learning calligraphy, and trying to carry that mental state throughout every single day that I'm painting. And it's a constant reminder. So that is something that I'm always working on, but especially in the beginning, I think it attributed to a lot of my success early on with getting better at watercolor, getting better at calligraphy, and then therefore also better at business and all of that, was I didn't have any sort of hindrance or fear, or obviously there was little things here and there like, ooh, that was terrible, or that should have been, that I shouldn't have mixed that green, that sucks. But it wasn't this overwhelming sense or burden of like, I just can't do this. And I do also attribute a lot of that to the way I grew up and was raised. My mom is a painter. She was a pianist for a little bit. Like, she was creative, she's creative. And when we were growing up, there was always art supplies around, there's always stuff. And so we never had lessons or anything. It was just like, this is what we do to play. And I think that was really helpful for me mindset-wise, of not being afraid of art supplies. There's so many people that have this intimidation and fear with a blank sheet of paper or a blank canvas. And thankfully, with the way I grew up around art supplies, it was centered around play. Boredom breeds creativity was my mom's mantra, my mom's motto. And so that's kind of just how I grew up. And I need to get back to that every single day, because it gets harder and harder, I feel like, with the more noise that we surround ourselves with. And I say this all the time, it's kind of like my mantra. My mom has hers, I've got mine, is create something every day, even if it sucks. Because even if it does end up in the trash can, you are still developing that muscle memory, that eye for color, that eye for composition. No painting is a waste of time. No painting is a waste of energy. It's all helping you develop into a better artist, a better creative. And let's start focusing on enjoying the process and not just always looking for that outcome. So my third growth moment is didn't listen to negative voices and didn't compare. So I do want to say 10 years ago, the online space, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube even, was not as saturated, not as noisy as it is today. So the comparison trap is really difficult to overcome now, way more difficult to overcome now than it was 10 years ago. So I will say that. But I do think it is something that we can actively work on, and it starts with being mindful of. And so something that I am so grateful for when I was first starting out with watercolor and with calligraphy was that I was on Instagram, but I didn't have all these accounts that I was following that were posting amazing calligraphy and incredible floral watercolor, that I was just scrolling all day and getting jealous and comparing and just having those internal negative voices over and over say, you're not good like they are, or your flowers suck in comparison to that person. So my biggest tip there is to turn the social media away, turn it off, put your phone on airplane mode when you're painting, put on some good music or watch a tutorial on our YouTube channel, and just get into whatever helps you get into that flow state, whether it's comfy clothes, good music, turning your phone off and putting it away so you don't have any distractions, or you don't get sucked into the scroll of competition and comparing yourself. Whatever it is that you need to do that, that is going to be the best way for you to turn off that mental chatter, to turn off the comparison game and those negative voices, and just paint for painting's sake. Paint because it's therapeutic. Paint because it's fun. Paint because it brings you happiness and joy and peace, whatever. It brings me so much peace. I used to have so much anxiety, especially when I was first starting with watercolor. I hated my job. I've already mentioned that. Hated my job, felt really kind of depressed at the time. And painting for me was that outlet that was very therapeutic. It was calming for my mind, calming for my body. And so go back to what it is about art that you like. What it is about art that is giving back to you. It is a kind of like self-care in a way. Enjoy the process and ignore the negative voices and ignore the comparison trap by actually being active about it and turning your phone off or putting it to the side or whatever. Okay, so we've talked practice, we've talked some mindset stuff and all of that, but let's get a little bit more practical now. So my fourth growth moment is quality supplies. So about 2 years into my art endeavors, I started my business in late 2012, early 2013. So around 2015, I met a lovely thing called high quality supplies or just good supplies. The box of art supplies that we randomly discovered was, most of it was acrylic paint that I was watering down to use as watercolor. I don't know if that's good, probably not. The brushes were really, really cheap. The paper was super duper cheap as well. And so I was working on these cheap supplies and just not good watercolor supplies because obviously acrylic paint for years, 2 years. And then all of a sudden I discovered a YouTube artist who was using Winsor and Newton. At the time I was working on arches and now I work on Stonehenge Aqua cold press paper. So quality paper. I discovered quality paper, quality paint, and quality brushes. And when I started using these pigments that were rich and bold and actually moved on the paper, and when I used paper that wasn't, making my colors look all murky and weird and was actually drying the way that I painted it when it's wet, and my brushes were moving how I wanted them to, they were flexible and they were holding pigment and water well, my mind was blown. My art literally changed overnight, not exaggerating, because the colors were so vibrant and they were actually moving and blending and drying well and light fastness and all of this stuff. So if you've been working on, cheaper, whatever supplies you have on hand, but you want to take it up a notch because you're starting to feel like you need to get in a groove with watercolor or with calligraphy, whatever it is, check out some of the supplies that we recommend in these videos. We'll link them below. They are amazing. They actually transformed my art journey. They made me want to practice more. They made me so excited to paint because the colors were beautiful and all the things that I already mentioned. And I was having so much fun with watercolor. Obviously before that, I was having fun with it because it was new, it was fresh. But after 2 years, I was like, okay, I can do so much with these things, with these supplies. And then my world was just blown when I finally got my hands on some really good quality supplies. And I know that not everybody's budget, can allow for high quality paints, professional level paints, or the paper, the palette, all the things, I get it. But you start somewhere, start with 1 tube of paint, or start with 3 tubes of paint, or, maybe you practice on the cheaper paper, and then for like really, really, honing in on your style or doing certain things with watercolor, you use the more expensive paint. But that, if you do really want to start enjoying your process and seeing results in your watercolor, your art, whatever medium it is, good supplies is really what transformed it for me. So the fifth and final growth moment that took me from bad to good with my art journey is actually researching and learning technique and color theory. Color theory was huge for me. So I was just messing around, no clue what I was doing, no rhyme or reason to what I was doing. I was just like, oh, I'll plop some paint here, plop some paint here, and I don't know what I'm doing. But when I was able to discover wet and wet painting, wet on dry painting, brush techniques, how to mix colors, all of this stuff, it was like, oh, now I get it. So I want to take it back to when I was learning piano. I started learning piano when I was 11 years old, or actually 6 years old for about a year. And then I started again with a new teacher when I was 11 years old. The teacher when I was 6 years old taught me the traditional way. I was sight reading. I could only play piano if I was looking at something and reading it and then plucking it on the piano. But my teacher, George Anderson, in junior high, 11, 12 years old, really unveiled this obsession with piano and ability with piano that I didn't know I had, unlocked this ability with piano I didn't know I had because he taught me music theory. So he wasn't just teaching me how to read things and then all of a sudden if I didn't have sheet music in front of me, I couldn't do anything unless I had something memorized. He was teaching me why this is a dominant chord and why this is a tonic chord and why the key of C has no black notes and how to just play, because I knew the foundations, I knew the techniques. So I was able to, as an artist, develop my own style in a similar way because I was learning techniques. I was learning the foundations of the medium and discovering why colors are harmonious sometimes and why colors are disharmonious sometimes or cause strain sometimes. Without knowing that, without knowing the techniques and the foundations, I was just lost. I would have to look at a photo of something and then paint it and hope it would look like the photo. But now, because I've had a lot of hours spent researching and digging deeper into color theory and wet and why it works a certain way, I now have this comfortability and this confidence to approach paper and develop my own style and paint something from imagination or not. You can still look at reference photos, obviously, but feel way more confident, way more comfortable with a brush and with blank paper. And so I would say the fifth and probably one of the biggest growth moments for me is learning technique, brush, color mixing, and color theory is huge. If you are a noob to color theory or to all this technique stuff, we have tons of tutorials here on this YouTube channel for you to check out. We just did a color theory, color wheel chart tutorial that's amazing for you to check out. And then also my books, Everyday Watercolor, have a huge section on color theory and brush technique, all of that kind of stuff in them as well. So we'll link the books in the description of this video, and we'll make sure to link to all the videos as well where we covered all of the foundations, because that is huge for growth, for seeing results in your art. There you have it. Those are the biggest growth moments for me that I've had in my art journey with watercolor, with calligraphy, with all of the things. I hope they were helpful to hear. And I just want to remind you all, if you are just starting out, you have to remember that when you're comparing yourself and your results, your artwork, whatever it is, to somebody who's been at it for years and years, go back to the first one. It's taken me years to develop this skill. It's taken me years to feel more comfortable behind a brush. So stick with it, be patient, continue to practice and develop that muscle memory. And then also, I would love it if you commented below with what your favorite growth moment is, if you maybe have something else to contribute so that people scrolling the comments, you can help build this community and help other people who are just scrolling the comments and need help or encouragement or need some other growth strategies, etc. That'd be super helpful if you could just comment below what's something that's helped you in your art journey out as well. And I hope you like this video, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.